So then you're also playing that mental game with yourself of like, no, stay focused.
And your body
job.
feels like you need to breathe.
But
you need to exhale first.
You're fighting flight or flight to play.
And you get a little dizzy sometimes too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Piccolo playing, the new extreme sport.
Hi everyone, welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Dani Meyer, bassist and VP of Artistic. Today, Serena and I talked to Omaha Symphony third flute and piccolo Lisa Meyerhofer. Lisa is our soloist on the next Symphony Jocelyn, performing Lieberman's Concerto for Piccolo and Orchestra on March 2nd. We talk about how there's no such thing as non-solo piccolo, bad air, and, we find out exactly how much I don't know about wind instruments. Spoiler, more than I thought. Enjoy.
Lisa, hi.
Hi.
Would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Lisa Meyerhofer. I play flute and piccolo with the Omaha Symphony.
Awesome. Do you remember your first orchestra concert?
I was trying to think about this because I don't know if I remember the actual first one.
It's hard, right? Like, it's surprisingly difficult.
I'm really not sure because I didn't come from a strongly musical family, at least not my parents. There was always an interest in music, but so we weren't like symphony goers or anything like that. It was only until I started playing in school that I started being interested in this stuff. And the one concert I do remember is when James Galway played with the Buffalo Phil. So I'm from Buffalo, so I remember that. I don't remember what he played. I just remember being in the third row and getting my program signed. That's all I remember.
Do you still have that program?
Probably somewhere. Yes. It's hidden in an attic somewhere, probably. But
do you know what he played?
I don't remember. It might have been something more traditional, like Mozart. It probably was actually Mozart Concerto.
Oh man! And James Galway, who the concerto that you're playing he was written.
It was not written for him, but he has recorded it. Yeah.
Okay.
It was written for Jan Gippo in St. Louis Symphony.
So you remember? Okay, so you remember going to see the Buffalo Phil.
Mm-hmm.
With James Galway, which is amazing. Were you already playing flute at that point?
Yes, I was probably already in high school because I bet my teacher, who was second flute in the Buffalo Phil, she probably helped me get those tickets. And then, so I was probably a freshman in high school.
Were you, okay, so this is something I'm curious about. I grew up in Delaware, and we did not have orchestras in a lot of schools.
Right.
Even playing bass, it meant I was playing in a wind ensemble or a band.
Oh, yeah.
On a bass or two. Did you start in a band or a wind ensemble?
Yes. Yeah, definitely started in band. Fourth grade is when we started in New York. And I always played in band in my schools. But I did get to play in orchestra because of all-county auditions.
Okay. Was that a huge difference going from band to suddenly like, here's this festival ensemble and you're suddenly playing with a bunch of instruments that don't know how yours work either? Like,
it was definitely different, but I just remember thinking it was awesome. That's all. I did actually get a chance though in school because it wasn't really a middle school. It was kind of like a pre-middle school because our district was so big. We had a 5th and 6th grade school, and we had an after school extracurricular full orchestra that you could audition into. So I got to play in 5th grade starting with orchestra. Just like simple arrangements of things like excerpts from pictures at an exhibition and things like that. And it was the coolest thing ever.
This was in Buffalo?
Yeah.
Okay, do you remember like what part? Do you remember like what town?
My school that I grew up in, it was Lancaster. It's about 15 minutes away from Buffalo.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
5th grade.
Yep.
That might be one of the earliest like wind instruments.
Yeah, and it was all the represented instruments in an orchestra over there. Yeah.
Wow.
So I think we were doubled, but so there were 4 of us in the flute
That's
section.
good. That's even better. The more kids that get to get to play. Wow. When did you start playing piccolo?
Yeah.
I think it was 7th grade, so middle school. I don't remember why I picked it up. I think I was kind of interested, and then they needed somebody to do something in the band. But my dad's friend from college lived nearby in Rochester. He was a Civil War reenactor who played piccolo in the reenactments. So I borrowed his piccolo. and it was a
Wow.
Gemeinhardt wood piccolo. And that's what I started learning on, and just kind of figured it out. I'm pretty sure I did it in my lessons, but
I have so many questions. Was he a flute player as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he did. I think he grew up playing flute in school or something. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it was his piccolo that I borrowed.
I want to ask, because I feel like there are two kinds of flute players. Those that play piccolo and it's like immediately love at first sight and they love playing piccolo, or it's like a love-hate relationship where they're like, I never want to touch this instrument again.
Yeah.
And they kind of have to waffle back and forth when they are assigned it and they just really don't want to.
Okay, but this is a wind player thing across the board. This is not a string player problem at all. Like you guys, wind players have the, you play flute, therefore you must also play piccolo. You play bassoon, you must also play contrabassoon. And then you find people who are like, no, I'm a contrabassoonist and I happen to play bassoon, or I'm a piccolo player and I happen to play flute, or the opposite. So where do you...
Well, I have loved playing piccolo from the start. And it's more like I like the challenge of it. So that's why I've occasionally been intimidated by it until I learned more about it. But I've always loved it. I think out of all the auxiliary winds, though, it's the most standardized. Like, we all have to make sure we can play it. My professor in grad school said, if you don't like piccolo, if you don't want to play it at all, you better get really good at flute because you're going to need a principal position. And even then, you might still have to play piccolo.
Right, Maria still plays piccolo on occasion. Yeah.
And it gets actually written in the first flute parts a lot more often in modern times.
Yes, a lot of film music. If they're really scoring for a lot of...
There's been times here that all three of us have had to play at the same time. So
it's not just Stars and Stripes. You
no, not anymore. Yeah.
So you said the challenge of it. What is? I mean, obviously, these are the things as a bass player I just don't completely understand. You're going from an instrument roughly this size down.
Yeah.
Okay.
About a third of the size of the flute.
Are the ranges comparable?
So it's an octave higher. So there's, you're still looking at the exact same music, but it just sounds an octave higher. So you don't have to read a new clef or anything like that.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of a learning curve just adjusting to what it sounds like relative to what you see on the page.
Okay.
Because you expect to hear a different pitch from your flute playing. When I teach I usually, if they're interested, will start my flute students in middle school on piccolo. And that's one of the first things. They can get a sound pretty well, but then when they start to associate it with the music, it's like, well, wait a minute. You need to overshoot that a little higher because you're playing the lower version, or vice versa. So
when you say overshoot that,
they'll look at like a low A on the staff, and they'll blow a little too hard and it'll come up higher. Or it's usually the other way around. Like, they'll look at the middle A and think that they don't have to blow too hard because it's more like they're thinking flute, and it'll come out too low.
Okay, so literally you're changing octaves based on your breath control?
Yeah, so it's a faster wind speed.
So we'll explain the wind playing a little bit. So on a string instrument, you can, like, the note is the note. You could think of it playing on different strings. Those are your other options.
Sure. On
wind instruments, you kind of have one fingering for most notes.
Okay.
Depending on, sometimes there are certain notes where you may have one or two other options, but there's kind of two ranges of the flute where you're either playing the lower harmonic or the upper harmonic. And to get to the upper harmonic, you need to aim your...
Right. And that's very different actually from other winds. It's more like functions like a brass instrument, actually.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why they only have three. You can hit different harmonics with one fingering. On the flute, you have that for a whole range, a whole octave.
Okay, so yes, this is starting to make more sense because Pat talks about partials all the time.
We can do that, and actually, we practice harmonics sometimes like a brass player would, just to expand our flexibility.
So we have the ability to do that. It's just that those notes are not quite, they have different timbres and they're not very in tune compared to other fingerings.
So that's why we have the keys to refine it.
Got it. Okay, so basically, I say got it. Sure, my brain's just gonna explode the moment I get home. But okay, so you're saying when you're teaching kids how to go to piccolo, the slightest change in pressure based on how they were playing it on flute can suddenly send them in different directions on the piccolo that they weren't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it becomes a mental exercise even more than a physical exercise.
It's a lot of muscle memory and ear training. So when you go to piccolo, you're not only trying to figure out the octaves, but playing really high, we don't listen to that frequency on a regular basis. So the pitch is strange to adjust to. You can feel like you're both simultaneously sharp and flat. And you can't figure out until you practice for a while which direction you need to go to be in tune.
Whoa. Okay. So then when you're in the section as pick, who are you listening to then to kind of anchor you? Is that what you're practicing? Is essentially learning how to anchor yourself?
Yes and no. When I have a lot of stuff with the flute section, I will be trying to match the flutes. But a lot of times, since I'm right next to the violins, I'll be listening to them to match things. And funny enough, things like the bells, the glockenspiel, and the percussion, because we play a lot of little cute things or glittery things that happen with the xylophone. And they're a fixed pitch instrument, usually tuned a little sharper than we tune with the oboe. So I have to make sure I match that. I spend a lot of time with a tuner just making myself capable of bending the pitch as needed. So I'll do pitch bends watching the tuner and just make sure I can hit any mark depending on who I'm playing with at any time.
Okay. I had so many questions. I'm going to veer away from all of them. Pitch bend. Okay. What does a pitch bending exercise look like if it's part of your warm-up?
So I use a tuner where you can see the wavelengths as they're occurring, and it kind of tracks it. So you try to start in the green, in tune, and then I'll change a combination of the angle that I'm blowing and the speed of the air, and they're really slight changes. But I'll do that to purposely bend the pitch like maybe 10 cents flat, and then bring it back to center, and then bring it up again and back.
That's so cool. And it's such a non-string player. I mean, I just feel like that's such if I'm out of tune, unless it's an open string, most of the time I can just move my finger up or down, and then I'll eventually get to the place where I feel like it's good. And you're talking about a constantly recalibrating, not perfect pitch, but perfect relative pitch at all times that you don't really get to turn off.
Mm-hmm. There's the more you play, the more you learn, okay, well, this note is probably going to do this. So I will always try to aim here, and then in rehearsals you figure out, okay, well, with this chord or whoever I'm playing, whatever instrument or section I'm playing with, okay, maybe I have to adapt a little bit.
Does your equipment affect what notes do what?
Yes. This happens with flutes too, but it's a little more diverse with piccolos, depending on the brand you're using, or even just which instrument. It could be the exact same brand, but just because it's wood, that can shift depending on which instrument you have. So you learn the tendencies of your own instrument. And some things are similar across the board, like a high D tends to be flat on most piccolos. Okay. But then you have different degrees of it. Mine is fairly flat, and I have to practice a variety of things, like making sure I'm supporting enough on those notes. And also you learn alternate fingerings in case of emergency. They either change the pitch or the timbre, which sometimes even just changing the timbre will make you be more in tune, even if it looks the same on a tuner.
Mm-hmm. So in changing the timbre, you're talking about it becoming like brighter or darker,
or a little warmer or wider.
Okay,
just so it blends better depending on what you're playing at the time.
Wow. Okay, how many instruments do you have?
Okay.
Nick, by the way, set you up
on this whole gear. We weren't sure how much of a gear person you were, but
I am not a super gearhead necessarily. I've had the same flute since high school and the same piccolo since high school. I've changed the head joints.
Okay.
But that's it, because I have tried other instruments, but I love what I have. And I am more on the philosophy that if you're happy with your instrument, most of what you do comes from you. So I've always loved my flute. It's a Muramatsu DS with a heavy wall, which means the bore is denser. So it's a heavier flute than most people. So if I pick up somebody else's flute, it kind of like flies up in the air and I have to remind myself it's not my flute. But I love the tactile sense of having that weight. And when I tried it out, I just loved the low register. It gives it a huge depth and warmth. And I like the keys. I've tried other models of flutes, and I like a lot of things about different models, but I like the spacing of the keys that I have and the way they depress, and there's the way the pinky key is spread out. It just fits me. And I don't want to change that. Eventually I'll probably upgrade to something with more variety of metals in it. But the one thing I changed was the head joint, and just the way the sound is produced when I blow across it. The response is better, especially in the higher register. So I have a Powell head joint, and it's got a little bit of gold. It's called a riser, and it's on the inside of the lip plate. So you can't see it, but where the air hits the inside of the head joint, it just has a different response because of the gold.
When did you decide to change those head joints?
College.
Okay.
About halfway through college, I was like, okay, there's something holding me back a little bit. So we had a guest from Powell come and show us a bunch of head joints, and I just tried a few out and decided on what I have. So.
Does it feel a little bit like Harry Potter showing up
Yes.
and choosing his wand?
It is like choosing the wand. I didn't know a ton when I picked my flute, but I went to, I think it was the convention in Rochester. Just tried every brand of flute. Didn't know anything about them. But this mine was maybe the third one I tried. I knew instantly I loved it. Then I walked around and tried everything else, and nothing came close to me. So that's what I stuck with. And then the piccolo, I kind of, I got a little advice from the piccolo player in the Buffalo Phil. And I ended up with a model I think she had at the time, and maybe still does, I'm not sure. I have a Burkhardt Global. Now the name has changed to a Arizona or something. I can never remember exactly. But it's granadillo wood, just like all piccolos, or most piccolos are. There's a lot of materials out there now, and I don't have a lot of bells and whistles on it. I aim to one day get another piccolo that has some of the extra keys that make some of the pitches a little easier to play, but I love the warmth I get out of my piccolo, and I did change the head joint in grad school for that, for the same reasons as the flute. I was trying to find maybe a new piccolo, but I couldn't get anything that was easier to play. Like there were more complications with pitch and more of this and the other thing that didn't make it worth buying a whole new piccolo. So I found a head joint that really did what I needed it to do. So I have a Keefe head joint with a rose gold tenon. So the connection point between the body and the head joint is rose gold. So I love it.
It's almost like it is. You go in and you expect if I find something quote unquote like better or more expensive, you think it'll ultimately make life easier. But ultimately, I think, like you said, you find an instrument that you know and love, and then everything else, the ease of playing that, the devil you know. Well, even Wu Man was saying one of her interviews, her pipa, she feels like it's like a connection of her body.
Yeah.
And so when you get a new instrument, I imagine it almost feels like it's like, well, if I just disconnect my arm, I better find something that feels even better, or what's the point?
Right. Yeah. And you have to consider there's going to be a learning curve if you get a new instrument. So you can't just say, well, it doesn't feel like my flute, I can't get it. But if there's not enough of a benefit to getting a new instrument, and you can change just something more like just the head joint, which influences quite a bit, then that's more worth it than going all out and buying a whole new instrument, to me.
Yeah.
So.
We have string players and bows and swapping things out. It's like you don't really want to take the time to almost relearn all these things unless it's genuinely going to be worth it in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask about the Lieberman Concerto. Now, is this a piece you've been with, like your piccolo that you started in grad school, or is this a relatively new piece?
Yes.
What's kind of been your journey with
I
this?
played it in grad school on a recital and loved it and always wanted to play it with an orchestra. And it just completely changes the feel of the piece, or adds to the feel of the piece, really, because once you have the other timbres in the orchestra just evoking everything that he wanted in the piece, it just makes it so much more fun. So I'm really excited.
How do you prepare for stepping out from the center of the orchestra, from where you usually sit? Like, how do you get your mind around that?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think it might not be as big of a jump as you'd think, because just playing piccolo in the orchestra, you're exposed all the time. So the only difference is that now you can see me better. And I'm going to be playing for a longer amount of time. You can't hide. So this is just a different location, really.
I like that. Has anything changed, you feel like, from your idea of the piece from when you played it on your recital to now? Because you say, the music's coming from you, maybe the piccolo has stayed the same piccolo, but has your idea of the piece changed?
I think it's expanded. So I've taken a lot of what my teacher worked on with me in the piece, and now that I've performed more and have explored more music, I've kind of taking what I learned and developing it into, I understood these ideas where a lot of it sounds like Shostakovich. There's a little bit of Vivaldi in there, but now I'm hearing, there's a little bit of Bartók in this too. And all these things just kind of connect to each other in a way that's bigger than I really understood in college. So I'm feeling the music differently than I used to. I guess seeing the bigger picture a little bit more.
How does it feel working on this without a teacher's constant presence? Because I remember that was really hard. The one and only time I played a concerto with an orchestra was you have maybe a group of friends that you're playing for, or maybe a partner or someone, but you're going it alone.
I feel like I have a little bit more freedom now.
Yeah.
Like everything I'm deciding on, like tempos and things, are kind of still influenced by my teacher, but I don't feel like I have to justify myself making a decision. So in this case, I'm taking some tempos that are just slightly off from what Lieberman wrote in the music, just to because of how I feel it flowing together, especially with an orchestra accompanying instead of the piano, like leaning into certain things, speeding up a little bit more because it feels like the strings kind of move things forward. Basically, not that ashamed isn't really the right word, but I don't feel ashamed to make my own decisions.
That's really cool. It's like a fun way of looking at it. It's like it's not going it alone so much as just being able to be independent about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if your musical idea is compelling to you, then you can trust that it'll be compelling to someone else. And that's what matters, is that we hear your musical voice and we get to.
Yeah, I want to show people why I love the piece.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
And this was some fun inside stuff. Like usually with Jocelyn soloists, it is either, hi, we have a specific piece and we would love for you to play it, or it's a musician recommendation. Hi, hello, I've wanted to do this concerto forever. Would you please consider it? And this was the latter.
Yep.
Why the Lieberman out of all the piccolo concerti in the world?
Well, number one, because I loved it and always wanted to play it. But also Lieberman has added so much to the flute and piccolo repertoire, and it's fantastic. it's not just a 5-minute piece. These are significant works that are becoming a staple of our repertoire. And Vivaldi's awesome, but let's hear something really cool that shows all the things that a piccolo can do.
So it was written recently.
Yeah, 1996, I believe.
For people born after 1980.
It was in my lifetime. So
He's still alive.
yes,
Still living composer. Teaches at Juilliard,
I
believe something like that. Yeah.
So taking on piccolo concerto, you said you're going to be playing for a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
How do you what's your routine for preparing for that endurance wise?
Yeah, that's been mostly my focus because I do know the piece. It's just, can I make it through? Because I remember playing it as in my recital that it was exhausting, and I always made it through. But I'm more physically capable now. I'm just a better player now, so that automatically makes it feel better. But it's a lot of making sure I do significant warm-ups every day, that I'm making sure that I'm using my whole body correctly. So I'm not fatiguing specifically my mouth because I'm not breathing correctly and using my diaphragm and my whole air column correctly. And just running through things enough that I get used to the planning of the breaths and things. It's actually kind of interesting playing piccolo. You don't need as much air as flute. So when I have to go for a really long span of time, sometimes I have too much air. And I run into a problem that oboe players have a lot, which is a backup of bad air that sits inside. So I have to actually plan on when to release that air before I can take a good breath again. So I'm writing this sort of thing in the music.
Let's explain.
Yeah.
Let's explain. So oboists, when they breathe, because the reed is so small,
okay,
they can only force a certain amount of air through, but your body requires a certain amount of oxygen per minute, let's say, of being alive.
And you still need the support.
And you still need to support behind it. So what happens is you're holding all this air in your lungs, the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is happening, but you're not able to expel any of the air as you normally would when you're breathing, because you're playing the oboe and you're only expelling that tiny bit of air. So if you watch them when they're playing, they often, before they take another breath, breathe out the rest of the air in their lungs and then breathe back in. It's not as simple as we've run out of air. They still have air, but they've run out of oxygen in that air. So that's what we call bad air, is air that you need to expel before re-inhaling. And so Lisa is talking about running into that problem with piccolo. Do you put in only take up a half lung here or a 75?
I think that would be probably micromanaging too much.
Yeah.
And I would need a lot of practice to do that. It's more like there's a lot of little spots where I can take breaths in certain areas in the concerto. So I write out here and then one measure later in. So I'm kind of doing a back and forth whenever there's kind of a lull in the activity of the music. I'm still playing a lot, but
this is so cool though. This is like scuba diving or weightlifting, or it's just this extremely controlled, because weightlifters will tell you that part of bracing for a heavy lift is making sure that you are taking and holding in air for a certain amount of time, and then when they actually release it, so that it's part of what makes their body able to handle this. And the idea that, okay, what happens if you breathe in while you still have bad air?
It just feels awful.
So when you don't have that consistent level of oxygen, it's much more difficult to focus, and you're fighting against your natural instinct to breathe in more air because your body really wants that. So sometimes what happens also is that you will end up making a mistake in order for your body to have a chance to breathe. So then you're also playing that mental game with yourself of no, stay focused.
And your body feels like you need to breathe. But you need to exhale first.
You're fighting flight or flight to play.
And you get a little dizzy sometimes too.
Yes. Piccolo playing, the new extreme sport.
But this is amazing. You're literally, okay, so it's goodbye pillow. Okay, so you get to a point where you have to mentally fight survival instincts to actually continue to be able to concentrate and play.
Yeah. And typically it's not an issue because in the orchestra, we're doing little like 2-measure solos, like Czech 4. It's like, and then you're done. But this is so prolonged compared to that's the thing I really have to practice the most. And we're not trained to do it like oboe players. So it takes extra practice.
What? That's amazing. And so, I mean, okay, so when we were in COVID and we all had, so all the string players had to wear masks, that did become an exercise in suppressing some panic and anxiety because you have this thing over your face and you can only really breathe in through your nose because otherwise personally, I was fogging up my glasses.
Yeah, I was too. Yeah.
Right.
And while playing, like, I mean, just when we were using the wind defenders.
Yeah.
And those would fire the air back at us. And it's really cool, like the technology, they're meant so you can play outdoors because when the wind hits us, it actually takes the sound out of our playing. But playing it indoors, and especially on piccolo, the sound would like fracture. So certain notes would crack. And the pitch was different and everything sounded weird. So, yeah.
And your glasses would fog up like mine would. And so you're like, I breathed through my nose.
And then,
Yeah. You're trying desperately to still see the Sibelius or the Beethoven that's on the stand in front of you. And wow, I've never heard of bad air until right now.
Mm-hmm. I
mean, I've heard of people having breathing issues, but as far as like an actual in orchestra moment. Okay. So in that case, so piccolo, we talked about how you have to be very careful about how you change your breath and then how you, even just the slightest adjustment can send you into the wrong octave. One of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with wind players is, again, you all seem to have this collection of auxiliary instruments that just keep going. Like if someone told me there was a contrabass flute, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, there is. A sub-contrabass, yeah. I'm nowhere near owning one of those that costs a fortune. And
there's like 4 or 6.
It's a very niche kind of thing.
Well, how expected is it that you will know how to play it, and how quickly are you expected to figure it out?
That absolutely not a sub-contra, but
let's say alto.
Alto's pretty typical. You should at least know how to play one, and we're not really expected to own one, although I do. And I love having an alto. It's very convenient.
What's the learning curve for alto?
It's kind of like anti what we were trained as flute, especially piccolo, because you don't have to form as much of an embouchure. It's not as structured. It's more like just blowing across a pop bottle. You get winded a little bit more. There's more air. It's kind of like, oh. Especially when you go to bass. Alto, it's not a huge shock, but bass is a lot of air.
It's almost the opposite problem.
Yeah,
piccolo, where now you're like playing the tuba of the flute, and you can't get enough air.
Right, like you. How long does it take you to learn? Are the fingerings? Are you keeping your hands in 2 places for each of these? Or are you learning a new set of fingerings?
All of them are the same fingerings, and then there's little ways you can modify just depending on what instrument you have.
So they try to make it easier in the sense that your hands are doing the same thing with each instrument. It's a difference in how you're approaching it from like embouchure down into your lungs. And
the tubing is bigger, so your hands are wider. And the keys, they modify them so you can reach everything, but it's still, the spacing feels a little different. Sometimes you have a curved head joint.
It's a little bit like saxophones, I would say.
Yes.
Right, where saxophones are in different keys, so that they would sound different from the notes that you're reading on the page, which is similar to the alto, bass flute, and all that. But the fingerings stay the same between saxophones and between flutes.
But see, I didn't know that. Yeah. That's okay. The fingerings stay the same. So it's almost like if you learn one, is that why teachers are so insistent that if you know flute, then you should learn piccolo? Because it's not so much learning a completely new instrument as it is taking it to a different level.
Well, when I was in school, they didn't really push it on us because if you're not serious about it, then you don't really have to learn it. But professionally, I mean, it's more like a necessity. Then this will help you in one way or another. Although my piccolo playing has helped my flute playing and vice versa.
Yeah.
Like little things about each make certain things easier.
Is it because you feel like, are you taking little like lessons that you've learned with one and then translating it back over, or?
Yeah. So like the extra support, like because the piccolo is so high, I use that type of feeling. If I'm not feeling great that day in my third octave, the top part of the flute, I'll just remind myself, okay, well, it should feel a little bit more like the piccolo. Just make sure you're aiming a certain way, using enough air.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to play all four, like piccolo, flute, alto, and bass on one concert?
The only time I might have had to is in flute choir, but I have had to do 3 in one.
Yes. Frequently.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge with like the flexibility of the embouchure between?
Yeah, a little bit. It's just kind of weird. Like, especially if you have to play an extended period of time on alto and then go to piccolo.
Mm-hmm.
Then
so
the
that's
piccolo
the
feels
hardest.
really tiny.
Yeah.
Or actually just going from alto to flute makes the flute feel tiny, which it's not. But it's more the extremes when you go from piccolo to alto or alto to piccolo when you really notice it.
We did see a lot of that in Harry Potter, because the Harry Potter orchestras tend to be...
That's usually where I get it. Although the reason I own an alto flute is the summer opera festival that I've played at for years. We did a Benjamin Britten opera, Albert Herring, and it's a chamber orchestra, so there's one of each wind. And I had to play an extended alto flute solo, duet with bass clarinet, and that's why I bought it, because they don't own one at this opera company, so I had to find one.
Oh, so you could actually like physically prepare for that.
Okay.
So extended solo duet rather with bass clarinet. That was one of the other things I wanted to ask you was you have all these. Like, I love looking in our wind section, and where I'm sitting, I always have a great. I can just like turn my head, and you guys are always right there. The number of times where you are paired up, piccolo and E flat clarinet, alto and bass, contrabassoon and bass clarinet. Like I love these combination of timbres and colors. How often do you keep that in consideration when you are preparing your part? If you know you're going to be matched with like Rosario and E flat or something.
Yeah,
like that.
that's probably the one where I actively think about it a little bit more. The rest of the combinations just like, okay, I'm aware that I'm going to be playing with this person. But piccolo and E flat clarinet is kind of notorious for being a gnarly combination to deal with. And if you have a good player, it's usually not a big deal. You just go, okay, this pitch was weird. Can we just try it together? And you figure out how to match. So it's just kind of being like, okay, I might have to spend some time with this person if something goes weird.
Gnarly because you're both
high in the frequency, and the E flat clarinet has its own issues. And it's a little different. I am dating a clarinet player, so I know a lot of clarinet things too. But they don't necessarily play E flat as universally as we play piccolo. They're not required to learn it necessarily.
Because it's a weapon.
Depending who you ask. But they face the same kind of obstacles we do with piccolo, like learning how the pitches sound up there. And if you're not playing it constantly and then you're thrown into E flat, you have to make some adjustments and figure out how to play with a piccolo player while you're also trying to figure out if your own notes aren't doing.
How much can you hear? How well can you hear yourself? Because
quite well.
All the time.
Too well. It's barely a foot away from my right ear.
Okay.
I mean, all the sound comes out of the keys, really. So, yeah, almost too well. Because you can hear yourself more than you can hear anything else around you. So you're not always 100% sure if what you're hearing is true relative to what someone in the audience or someone in another section is hearing.
Okay, and that probably has even more with dynamics. It's like you're trying to regulate how loud or soft you actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't tell how accurately you're hitting that, who are you relying on then? Or what are you relying on to give you that feedback?
Well, other people in my section, people in the audience who are helping out, and the conductor, but a lot of it is just trusting that my sound is coming out correctly. And even when something feels really loud to me, it probably sounds perfectly fine out in the hall. I teach my students that a lot too when they're first learning piccolo. I'm like, it's going to sound really loud, but trust me, it sounds great. Just make sure the note comes out. And that's the important part.
That's also a brass player problem. I know it's very hard when you're projecting into a hall, especially. It's like what you hear coming out of the bell is not necessarily, you don't have any context for how it actually sounds in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Versus a string player also where you have a physical, I feel like it's a lot easier for me in the string section to tell how loud or soft I actually am, especially compared to the people who are all playing the exact same thing next to me.
Right.
And so if I can't hear my principal, if I can't hear specific like wind solos that are happening, I know I need to tone it down or so on and so forth. But it's a massive trust exercise. I feel like everything about the piccolo is essentially, this is a trust exercise.
Yes. Yep. And I like the challenge. So that's why I love it.
That's awesome. Okay, but if you were given an opportunity to walk on stage and play any instrument without consequences, no one gets mad at you, no one yells at you for touching something, what instrument is that?
It's completely opposite from the piccolo. So I did have to learn all the instruments because I was also a music ed major. So I remember all these. So any of the low instruments.
Yeah.
Bassoon, bass clarinet, trombone. I loved playing them all because I like the tactile response that you get. We don't really get that from the flute because a lot of the air and the vibration just goes out. When you play, any other reed or wind instrument, brass instrument, all that vibration is going right into the instrument, right into your fingers. And especially when you play a low instrument, it just feels so cool.
Yeah, it's very much like, feel the power.
Yes. But that's also why I like the piccolo, because you're not physically feeling the power, but you have the power.
Yep.
The Shira of instruments.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay, but you were a music education major.
Mm-hmm.
You were very, very busy. When do you still, what degrees did you get in grad school? Was that undergrad or grad?
Undergrad, I did a double major in music ed and performance.
Okay, so you were very busy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is teaching still a big part of your life?
I do a lot of private teaching, and it's mostly just that at this point. But I've gone to work with little groups at schools now and then. That's really what I liked the most about the ed major. I used it partially because I was interested in it, but I got to student teaching and I'm like, this is not entirely what I want to do, but I like the one-on-one. I like the small group lessons. But I think, at least learning the instruments, I think everybody should learn the instruments, at least a little bit, because you get such an understanding of what struggles somebody else is going through that you don't necessarily have on your instrument. But I'm so glad I don't have to deal with reeds. But we have our own problems, and we got to practice technique and all these things all the time, and pitch. And but I loved everything that I learned through my education degree, and I still use it all the time.
Yeah, that is so cool. Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you for having.
Feels like a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, of course.
Can't wait. Lowell Lieberman's Piccolo Concerto, March 2nd at the Jocelyn. Mm-hmm. But you're awesome. That's piccolo is a survival. It's a survival instrument. That is ridiculous.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Can't wait. That was awesome. I had no idea. You're seriously blowing my mind. I had not a clue